Ambassador Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive chamber, looking up at the curved walls that stretched high above him. Hundreds of alien beings filled the seats, their strange forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some looked like giant insects, others like living crystals, and a few resembled nothing he had ever seen on Earth. The air buzzed with clicking sounds, musical tones, and other noises that the translation devices turned into words he could understand. Jake had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Council for 3 years now. In that time, he had learned that most of these alien species thought humans were nothing special. They saw Earth as a young world full of violent people who had barely learned to travel between stars. Today he hoped to change their minds about something very important. "Members of the Council," Jake said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "I come before you with urgent news. Our deep space stations have detected something moving through the outer regions of the galaxy. We call them the Void Hunters, and they are heading this way." The chamber erupted in a mix of sounds. Some aliens made chittering noises that meant laughter. Others created harmonic tones that showed they were not impressed. Jake waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Behind him, a large screen appeared in the air, showing images from human monitoring stations. The pictures were grainy and dark, but they clearly showed something destroying entire star systems. Planets that had once been full of life were now cold and empty. Space itself seemed to be twisted and broken in strange ways. "These creatures have already destroyed the Kepler colonies," Jake continued. 50 million people lived there. Now there is nothing left but empty space and twisted metal. High Counselor Zethkari, a being that looked like a walking diamond the size of a small building, flashed with angry red light. The translation system made his thoughts into words that cut through the air like ice. "Human Morrison, your species has a history of creating enemies where none exist. These Void Hunters you speak of are probably just pirates with better ships than yours." Dr. Lisa Hayes stepped forward from the human delegation. She was Earth's top expert on alien life forms, and her hand shook slightly as she activated another hologram. This one showed the remains of what had once been a thriving city on one of the Kepler worlds. Now it was just a crater filled with gray dust. "Counselor, with all respect, our scans show that these are not pirates," Lisa said. "Whatever hit the Kepler colonies broke down all living matter at the molecular level. This is not normal destruction. This is something that eats the building blocks of life itself." The representative from the Talon Federation, a bird-like creature with bright blue feathers and sharp eyes, ruffled his wings in what Jake had learned was their version of laughter. "Perhaps if humanity spent less time building weapons and more time learning proper manners, you would not see monsters hiding in every shadow," the alien said. Commander Alex Turner, wearing the dark blue uniform of Earth's Defense Force, stepped up beside Jake. His face was stern and serious. "We are not asking you to take our word for it. We want to share our defense plans and our weapon designs. The human fleet is ready to help protect any world that asks for our help." This caused an even bigger wave of laughter and dismissive sounds from the assembled aliens. To them, humans were babies in the galactic community. Earth had only joined the Council 50 years ago, and most species still remembered when humans were fighting wars among themselves on their home planet. The idea that these violent newcomers could teach the older, wiser species anything about defense was clearly ridiculous to them. The crystalline hegemony speaker, a creature that looked like living glass, chimed in with musical tones. "The humans offer us their primitive weapons? We have been traveling the stars for 10,000 years while they were still throwing rocks at each other." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "Our weapons may be new, but they work. We have learned things about space and time that might surprise you. All we ask is that you consider the possibility that we are right about this threat." Dr. Karen Wells, Earth's representative to the Galactic Science Consortium, moved to stand with her fellow humans. Her expression was grim as she looked around the chamber. "The data does not lie. Something is moving through the galaxy, and it is destroying everything in its path. Whether you believe us or not, it is coming." The session continued for several more hours, but Jake could see it was hopeless. Every piece of evidence they presented was dismissed. Every offer of help was laughed at. The alien species had made up their minds long before the humans had even entered the chamber. Earth was too young, too violent, too primitive to be taken seriously. As the session finally ended, Jake gathered his team and headed for the exit. The other human delegates walked beside him in silence. They all knew what this meant. When the Void Hunters came, Earth would face them alone. The human delegation made their way through the corridors of the massive council station. Aliens of all kinds moved past them, going about their daily business. Some stared at the humans with curiosity, others with barely hidden contempt. A few nodded politely, but Jake could see the pity in their alien features. At the docking bay, the Earth ship Defiance waited for them. It was a sleek vessel, built with the best technology humanity could create, but it looked small and fragile next to the massive alien ships that filled the bay. As they walked up the ramp, Jake caught the eye of Dr. Wells. "They will regret this," she said quietly. "Maybe," Jake replied, "but by then, it might be too late for all of us." The Defiance pulled away from the council station and began its journey back to Earth. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Jake looked out at the stars and wondered how much time they had left. Somewhere out there in the dark between galaxies, something hungry was coming, and when it arrived, the galaxy would learn too late that humanity's warnings had been real. The Council had laughed at Earth's fears. Soon they would discover that some fears are worth listening to. Back on the Council station, the alien representatives returned to their usual business of trade agreements and territorial disputes. None of them noticed the faint signals coming from the Outer Rim territories. None of them saw the star systems that had gone quiet in the past few days. The hunt had already begun. 3 months had passed since the council meeting, and Captain Ben Mitchell was beginning to think that maybe the aliens had been right. The ESS Ranger patrolled the outer territories, checking on trade routes and keeping an eye out for pirates. It was boring work, but Ben preferred boring to the alternative. Then the distress call came in. "Captain," called Communications Officer Rachel Stone from her station. "I'm picking up an emergency signal from the Altarian system. It's cutting in and out." Ben moved to look over her shoulder at the communication display. The Altarians were one of the few alien species that had always been kind to humans. They were peaceful traders who loved mathematics and built beautiful cities that floated on their world's vast oceans. If they were in trouble, Ben wanted to help. "What does the message say?" he asked. Rachel's face went pale as she listened to her headphones. "It's mostly static, sir, but I think I heard something about ships appearing out of nowhere, and then it just stopped." Chief Engineer Sam Davis looked up from his station. "Captain, I can have us in the Altarian system in 6 hours if we push the engines." "Do it," Ben ordered. "Rachel, keep trying to raise any Altarian ships or stations. If they're under attack, we need to know what we're flying into." The Ranger jumped into hyperspace, racing toward the Altarian system at maximum speed. During the journey, Ben tried to contact other ships in the area, but no one responded. It was as if the entire region had gone silent. When they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Altarian system, Ben knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The system's 3 suns were still burning, but everything else was wrong. The space around the planets was filled with drifting ships, but none of them were moving under their own power. "My God," whispered Science Officer Dr. Emma Pierce. "Captain, I'm not reading any life signs from any of the ships. And the planet's oceans have turned gray." Ben stared at the main screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The Altarian homeworld had once been a beautiful blue marble covered with floating cities that sparkled like jewels. Now it looked like a dead rock covered in gray soup. "Take us closer to one of those ships," Ben ordered. As the Ranger approached a large Altarian trading vessel, the crew could see that something had drained all the color from its organic hull. The ship that had once been a living green was now brittle and brown like a dead leaf. "Captain," Dr. Pierce called out, her voice tight with fear, "I'm detecting massive gravity problems throughout the system. It's like something is feeding on the stars themselves." Before Ben could respond, space itself seemed to tear open near the planet. What came through was not a ship in any sense that humans understood. It looked like a wound in reality, a dark shape that hurt to look at directly. The scanner screens flickered and went crazy when they tried to focus on it. "What the hell is that thing?" asked Lieutenant Chris Morgan from the weapons station. "I don't know," Ben replied, "but get our weapons ready. All hands to battle stations." The alarm klaxons began to wail throughout the ship as the crew prepared for combat. More of the strange ships appeared, phasing into normal space like nightmares becoming real. They moved without any visible engines, gliding through space as if the laws of physics did not apply to them. "Weapons locked and ready, Captain," Chris reported. But sir, the targeting computer can't get a solid lock on them. It's like they're not completely here. One of the alien ships turned toward the Ranger and Ben felt a chill run down his spine. The thing had no obvious front or back, no windows or weapon ports. It was just a dark mass that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. Fire all weapons, Ben ordered. The Ranger's plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy. The weapons were the best that Earth's technology could produce, advanced enough to impress even the snobbish aliens of the Council. But as the beams and missiles reached the enemy ship, they passed right through it as if it was not there. No effect, Captain, Chris reported, his voice cracking slightly. The weapons are going right through them. The alien ship responded by firing something back at the Ranger. It was not a beam or a missile, but something that looked like pure darkness given form. Where it touched the ship's hull, the metal simply stopped existing, not destroyed or melted, but erased as if it had never been there. Hull breach on Deck 5, called out Sam Davis. But Captain, this is impossible. The breach isn't following normal patterns. It's like the ship is forgetting how to exist. More of the dark beams reached out for the Ranger, and each one carved away another piece of the ship. Ben realized with growing horror that these weapons were not just destroying matter. They were unmaking it at a fundamental level. All hands, abandon ship, Ben ordered. Get to the escape pods now. The crew began rushing toward the evacuation stations, but as they reached the pod bays, they discovered something that made their blood freeze. The alien ships were not just destroying the Ranger. They were somehow pulling the crew toward them through the hull breaches. Dr. Pierce activated an emergency beacon with shaking hands as she watched something impossible reach through the wall of the ship. It was not quite tentacles and not quite energy, but something that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Emergency message to Earth Command, she spoke rapidly into the beacon. The Void Hunters are real. They're not from our universe. They exist in some kind of space beneath normal reality, and they're feeding on the basic structure of existence itself. They're not destroying matter, they're making it forget how to exist. The thing reached her then, and Dr. Pierce's final scream was cut short as she was pulled into a space that had no name. Ben managed to reach one of the few working escape pods and launched just as the Ranger came apart around him. As his small craft drifted in space, he watched the alien ships finish their work. They did not salvage anything from the destroyed vessels. Instead, they seemed to absorb the very information that had made the ships real. The emergency beacon's message traveled faster than light toward Earth, carrying news that would change everything. As Ben's pod was picked up by a passing human freighter 3 days later, reports were already flooding in from across the galaxy. The Zephyrian colonies had gone silent. The Nexus trade stations had stopped transmitting. The warrior worlds of the Crimson Sovereignty were reporting attacks by impossible enemies that could not be fought with normal weapons. In the halls of Earth's Defense Command, Admiral Pete Collins stood before a wall of screens, showing the spreading zones of silence across the galaxy. Each dark area represented worlds that had been touched by the Void Hunters, places where reality itself had been damaged. The aliens had laughed at humanity's warnings. Now, as panic spread through the galactic community like wildfire, Earth's defensive fleets began preparing for a war against enemies that existed outside the normal rules of existence. The hunt was spreading, and the galaxy was finally beginning to understand that the primitive humans had been right all along. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was nothing like the orderly meeting 3 months earlier. Alien representatives crowded into the chamber, their voices creating a chaos of panicked sounds. Some species that had never spoken to each other before were now huddled together, sharing information about the spreading disaster. High Counselor Zethkari's crystalline form flickered rapidly between different colors as he tried to restore order. The proud being who had dismissed human warnings with such confidence now pulsed with the deep red patterns that meant fear in his species. Admiral Pete Collins entered the chamber with a small group of human officers. Unlike the previous diplomatic gathering, this time every alien eye was focused on the humans. The species that had been considered too primitive to listen to was now the only one that seemed to have answers. Members of the council, Pete began, his weathered face calm despite the crisis surrounding them. Based on our encounters with the Void Hunters and the data we have collected, we now understand what we are facing. A holographic display appeared above the chamber, showing the spreading zones where star systems had gone dark. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Void Hunters were not attacking randomly. They were following a specific path that would eventually lead them to the most populated regions of the galaxy. Dr. Helen Brooks stepped forward, her hands steady as she manipulated the holographic controls. She was Earth's leading expert on strange physics, and her work had led to humanity's first breakthrough in understanding their enemy. The Void Hunters do not exist entirely in our universe, she explained. They operate from what we call null space, a layer of reality that exists beneath our normal dimension. This is why conventional weapons pass through them without effect. The chamber erupted in sounds of disbelief and fear. The idea that there were entire layers of reality that the advanced galactic species had never discovered was shocking enough. The fact that these layers contained hostile life forms was terrifying. Commander Lisa Parker activated another section of the display, showing tactical analysis from the few battles where survivors had escaped. Her voice was crisp and professional as she outlined humanity's discoveries. The hunters follow predictable patterns. They target systems with complex life forms first, specifically those with advanced civilizations. They are not just consuming matter and energy. Our analysis shows they are feeding on information itself, on the patterns that make consciousness possible. An elegant being from the ethereal collective, whose people existed as pure energy most of the time, shimmered with distress. You are saying they consume thoughts? That they eat the very essence of what makes us aware? In simple terms, yes, Dr. Brooks replied. They are unmaking the information structures that allow complex patterns to exist. When they finish with a system, it is not just dead. It has been returned to a state of basic chaos. The revelation sent new waves of panic through the chamber. The crystalline hegemony's representative chimed with tones of despair, while the insect-like delegates from the hive clusters clicked their mandibles in agitation. But Pete was not finished. However, we have discovered something that gives us hope. Humanity has developed weapons that can affect entities existing in null space. This announcement caused a moment of stunned silence. The same species that had been mocked for their primitive technology was claiming to have solved a problem that the galaxy's greatest minds had not even known existed. Dr. Brooks activated a new display showing Earth's latest weapon designs. Our physicists have created devices that fold space-time in specific ways. These dimensional weapons can force null space entities to exist fully in our reality, making them vulnerable to conventional attack. The Talon Federation's representative, the same bird-like being who had laughed at human warnings months earlier, ruffled his feathers nervously. How is this possible? Our scientists have studied space-time for millennia. The key is in how consciousness interacts with dimensional barriers, Dr. Brooks explained. Human neural patterns, specifically the way our minds process contradiction and paradox, allow us to control null space technology more effectively than other species. As if to prove the point, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Small groups of survivors, both human and alien, were fighting back using weapons based on Earth's dimensional technology. The proud warriors of the Talon Federation found themselves following human tactical officers into battle. The peaceful Altarian refugees were learning to use weapons that bent reality itself. Dr. Amy Foster's voice crackled through the communication system from her hidden research station in the Outer Rim. I have confirmed the neural interface theory. Human consciousness seems uniquely adapted to handle the paradoxes involved in null space manipulation. It may be related to our species' history of dealing with conflicting ideas. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the true scope of the Void Hunter threat was becoming clear. The beautiful spire cities of the ethereal collective began phasing out of existence as reality became unstable around them. The vast group minds of the Swarm Queens fell silent as their psychic networks were consumed from within. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, Engineer Captain Steve Reynolds led a desperate evacuation as the planet's massive factories were systematically dissolved. His final transmission captured the otherworldly horror. They are not just taking the buildings and the people. They are making the planet forget how to exist. It is like watching the universe erase itself. But even in the midst of cosmic horror, there were signs of hope. The dimensional weapons that human scientists had developed were being distributed to resistance cells throughout the galaxy. Former enemies worked together, united by the simple desire to continue existing. The proud sovereignty warriors, who had once considered humans to be nothing more than violent savages, now fought alongside Earth Marines using weapons that none of them fully understood. The peaceful traders of the Merchant Guild learned to use reality-bending technology to hide their refugee fleets in folded space. As the emergency session continued, Pete outlined humanity's plan for galactic defense. We are sharing our dimensional weapon technology with anyone who wants it. But we need the industrial capacity of the entire galaxy to produce enough weapons to make a difference. The response was immediate. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years began coordinating their manufacturing efforts. The insectoid hive clusters offered their vast production facilities. The crystalline hegemony provided their advanced computer systems for calculation, the complex mathematics involved. But even as hope began to spread, long-range sensors brought devastating news. The main Void Hunter fleet, a collection of entities so vast that they dwarfed entire solar systems, had finally revealed itself. And their course was clear. They were heading directly toward the galactic core, following a path that would take them straight through the Sol system. Earth, the world that had tried to warn the galaxy and been laughed at for its troubles, now stood directly in the path of an enemy that could unmake reality itself. But this time humanity would not face the darkness alone. The galaxy had finally learned to listen to the warnings of the species it had once dismissed. As the emergency session ended, representatives from dozens of species began coordinating their defense plans. The age of dismissing human concerns was over. Now the entire galaxy would stand or fall together, using weapons that only human minds could truly understand. The hunt was approaching its climax, and the galaxy was finally ready to fight back. Earth stood alone at the center of a galaxy in chaos. The once mighty Galactic Council had scattered like leaves in a storm. Most of the core worlds had gone silent, their populations either consumed by the Void Hunters or fled to hiding places in the far reaches of space. But as the main enemy fleet approached the Sol system, humanity prepared for a battle that would decide the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. Admiral Pete Collins commanded the defense from Earth's orbital fortress New Geneva. The massive station bristled with the latest dimensional weapons, but Pete knew it would not be enough. Around him, officers from dozens of species worked alongside humans at control stations. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The species that had been dismissed as primitive warmongers had become the galaxy's last hope. Admiral, Fleet Status Report, called out Captain Laura Mitchell from her flagship, the carrier ESS Valiant. Her ship was one of 47 vessels equipped with the new dimensional weapons, plus hundreds of refugee ships from 12 different species that had joined the desperate defense. Pete looked at the tactical display showing the defensive positions throughout the solar system. Human ships formed the backbone of the fleet, but they were joined by vessels from every surviving species. Talon Federation fighters flew alongside Earth interceptors. Crystalline hegemony cruisers shared formation data with human destroyers. Even the peaceful Altarians had armed their trading ships with weapons they had never wanted to use. Chief Engineer Ryan Clark had worked without sleep for weeks, installing dimensional folding arrays on everything from massive alien dreadnoughts to tiny scout ships. The technology was still new and dangerous, but it was their only chance against an enemy that existed partially outside normal reality. "The weapon systems are as ready as we can make them," Ryan reported, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But Admiral, we are still learning how these things work. If the Void Hunters have adapted since our last encounters, we might be in trouble." Dr. Helen Brooks coordinated the defense from the Research Command Center deep inside New Geneva. Her team had made constant improvements to the dimensional weapon systems, but she knew they were still working with incomplete understanding of null space physics. "Admiral, we have achieved a breakthrough," she announced over the communication system. "By linking our weapons to human neural patterns, we can create what we call reality anchors. These should force the Void Hunters to exist completely in our dimension, making them vulnerable to conventional weapons." The plan was desperate and untested. They would use Earth's moon as a massive dimensional anchor point, creating a zone of stable space-time around the planet. If it worked, the Void Hunters would be trapped in normal reality where physics worked the way it was supposed to. If it failed, Earth would become a sitting target for entities that could unmake planets with a thought. The enemy announced their arrival with a distortion in space itself near the edge of the solar system. Reality twisted and bent as the Void Hunter fleet emerged from null space like a nightmare becoming real. These were not ships in any sense that made sense to normal minds. They were living tears in the fabric of existence, each one the size of a small moon, surrounded by smaller entities that hurt to look at directly. "Mother of God," whispered Captain Tony Williams from his destroyer ESS Thunderbolt. "How many of them are there?" The answer came from the sensor stations throughout the fleet. Hundreds of major entities, thousands of smaller ones, and behind them all, something so vast that it defied measurement. The main Void Hunter Collective was a creature that dwarfed Earth's moon, a writhing mass of impossible geometry that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "All ships. This is Admiral Collins," Pete broadcast to the fleet. "Remember your training. Target the smaller entities first and keep your dimensional weapons synchronized with the neural interface systems. Do not try to engage the main collective until we have the lunar anchor system online." The battle began at Neptune's orbit. Captain Williams led the first attack wave, his crew of humans and alien volunteers charging directly into formations that should not have been able to exist. The dimensional weapons proved effective, tearing holes in null space and forcing the hunters into normal reality, where they could be destroyed by conventional fire. But the cost was enormous. For every Void Hunter destroyed, 3 defending ships were lost. The enemy weapons did not just destroy matter. They erased the information that told matter how to exist. Ships simply ceased, leaving behind not even debris. "They are learning," Dr. Brooks reported as the battle raged across the outer system. "The hunters are adapting to our dimensional frequencies. We need to constantly change our weapon resonance or they will phase out of our targeting range." Individual acts of heroism shone like stars against the cosmic darkness. Lieutenant Kelly Davis piloted her fighter directly into a Void Hunter's core, her ship's dimensional weapon overloading in a burst of twisted space-time that tore a hole in reality itself. The explosion took out 3 enemy entities but cost Earth one of its best pilots. Commander Jeff Parker led a boarding party against a hunter vessel using infantry equipped with personal dimensional weapons. His team walked through a nightmare landscape where up and down had no meaning, fighting creatures that existed in too many dimensions to properly see. They managed to plant charges that anchored the entity in normal space long enough for the fleet to destroy it. But only Parker and 2 of his soldiers made it back alive. The main Void Hunter Collective broke through the outer defenses like they were not there. As it approached Earth, space itself began to warp around it. The moon's orbit shifted slightly. The planet's magnetic field fluctuated. Reality was becoming unstable just from the creature's presence. "Admiral, we have to activate the lunar array now," Dr. Brooks called out urgently. "If that thing gets much closer, it will destabilize Earth's gravity well." Pete looked at the tactical display one last time. Most of his fleet was gone. The surviving ships were scattered and damaged. If the lunar anchor system failed, there would be nothing left to stop the Void Hunters from consuming not just Earth, but every inhabited world in the galaxy. "All ships fall back to Earth orbit," he ordered. "Dr. Brooks, activate the Luna array." The scientist's hands moved over her controls, initializing systems that had never been tested at full power. Deep beneath the moon's surface, massive dimensional generators came online, powered by reactors that drew energy from the quantum foam itself. "Dimensional anchor charging," Dr. Brooks reported. "All ships, when I give the signal, fire everything you have at the main collective. We will only get one chance at this." The Luna array reached full power, and suddenly the space around Earth became rigid in ways that had no names. Reality itself hardened, forcing the laws of physics to work the way they were supposed to work. The main Void Hunter Collective, which had been phasing in and out of normal space like a shark circling its prey, suddenly found itself trapped. For the first time in its existence, the ancient entity was completely vulnerable to the weapons of normal space. It writhed and twisted, trying to escape back to null space, but the dimensional anchor held it fast. "Now," Pete shouted. "All ships, fire everything." The surviving fleet opened fire with every weapon they had: human plasma cannons, alien particle beams, energy lances from a dozen different species, and most importantly, the dimensional weapons that only human minds could properly control. The combined firepower of the galaxy's last defenders converged on the trapped entity. The Void Hunter Collective began to come apart under the assault, its impossible geometry collapsing in on itself. But even as it died, it fought back with weapons that unmade reality itself. 3 more human ships simply ceased to exist, their crews erased from history. Pete watched from New Geneva as his fleet sacrificed everything in the desperate battle. Earth's children and their alien allies were dying to protect not just their homeworld, but the very concept of existence itself. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. The Luna array pulsed with energy that made space itself ring like a bell. For a moment that seemed to last forever. The laws of physics held their breath as human technology forced reality to remember itself in the face of entities that existed to make it forget. The massive Void Hunter Collective, revealed now as a writhing mass of impossible angles and hungry darkness, found itself completely trapped in normal space for the first time in its ancient existence. The creature that had devoured entire galaxies was suddenly vulnerable to the simple laws that governed matter and energy. Admiral Pete Collins watched from the command center of New Geneva as every surviving ship in the system opened fire. The combined weapons of humanity and their alien allies lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy. Plasma cannons, particle beams, quantum torpedoes, and energy lances from a dozen different species all converged on the trapped entity. But it was the dimensional weapons, guided by human neural patterns and powered by humanity's unique ability to understand paradox, that really hurt the creature. These reality-bending devices tore into the collective's core, unmaking the very foundations that allowed it to exist. Direct hit on the primary mass, Captain Laura Mitchell reported from the Valiant. The dimensional anchors are holding strong. It cannot phase back to null space. The battle that followed was visible from Earth's surface as artificial. Auroras painted the sky in colors that had no names. Dr. Helen Brooks coordinated the dimensional weapon strikes with the precision of a conductor, leading a cosmic orchestra. Her human mind somehow managed to track the 11-dimensional mathematics required to keep all the weapons working together. But the Void Hunter Collective was not dying quietly. As it felt its existence being torn apart, it lashed out with weapons that attacked the very concept of being real. Beams of pure negation reached out across space, and wherever they touched, ships and crews simply stopped existing. "We are losing the Thunderbolt," reported Captain Tony Williams just before his destroyer vanished from all sensors. "Tell my wife The transmission cut off as the ship was erased from reality. More ships fell to the entity's death throes. The brave crew of the Ranger 2 simply ceased, taking their alien allies with them into nothingness. But for every ship lost, the surviving vessels pressed their attack harder. They all knew that this was their only chance. Dr. Amy Foster, monitoring the battle from her hidden research station, transmitted a discovery that changed everything. "The collective consciousness is networked," she called out in excitement. "All the smaller void hunters throughout the galaxy are connected to this main entity. If we destroy it completely, the entire invasion should stop." This news spread through the fleet like wildfire. They were not just fighting for Earth or even for the solar system. This single battle would determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. Commander Jeff Parker, whose boarding party had barely survived their earlier mission, volunteered for one final desperate action. "Admiral, my team can take a dimensional charge directly into the creature's core. If we detonate it from the inside, that should finish the job." "Absolutely not," Pete replied immediately. "That would be suicide. Sir, with respect, we are all dead anyway if this thing escapes. Let us do this." Pete looked at the tactical display, watching as more ships disappeared under the collective's attacks. The creature was weakening, but so was his fleet. In a few more minutes, there would not be enough firepower left to finish it off. "Permission granted," he said quietly. "Godspeed, Commander." Parker's assault ship dove straight into the writhing mass of the dying collective, its hull protected by every dimensional shield the human engineers could devise. As the small craft disappeared into the entity's impossible geometry, Parker's final transmission reached the fleet. For Earth, for the galaxy, for everyone who ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. The dimensional charge detonated inside the creature's core, and suddenly space-time itself seemed to scream. The massive entity imploded in a cascade of dimensional feedback that sent ripples through reality. As it collapsed, something wonderful happened. Across the galaxy, the smaller Void Hunter entities suddenly stopped their feeding. Ships that had been halfway consumed began to return to normal. Planets that had been drained of life showed the first signs of recovery as the fundamental patterns of existence reasserted themselves. Dr. Foster's voice crackled through the communication system from across the galaxy. It worked. The entire invasion has stopped. The hunters they are just drifting now. Whatever network connected them has been broken. The aftermath was almost too quiet after the cosmic battle. Rescue operations began immediately as human and alien crews searched for survivors among the wreckage. Captain Ben Mitchell, who had somehow survived the destruction of his ship in the early encounters, coordinated relief efforts for refugees throughout the system. But the real surprise came when search teams found intact survivors in places that should have been completely destroyed. The Altarians, whose homeworld had been one of the first attacked, were discovered in dimensional pocket refuges that had protected them from the hunters. Their entire species had been saved by the same technology that humanity had used to defeat their enemies. 3 weeks after the battle, the Galactic Council reconvened for the first time since the crisis began. But this time they met on Earth itself, in the newly constructed Unity Station orbiting humanity's homeworld. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. High Counselor Zeth Kari, the same crystalline being who had dismissed human warnings months earlier, now pulsed with respectful blue-white patterns as he addressed the assembly. We gather today not to debate or to dismiss concerns, but to formally recognize that our survival was purchased by the courage and brilliance of a species we once considered primitive. B. Council chamber was filled with representatives from every surviving species, but the humans sat at the center table as equals. Ambassador Jake Morrison, the same man who had stood before a laughing council with his unheeded warnings, now addressed a very different group. The galaxy learned something important during these dark months, Jake said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber and through subspace to every inhabited world. When the universe itself seemed determined to forget us, humanity remembered not just how to fight, but why we fight. We fight not for conquest or glory, but because every thinking being deserves to exist, to grow, to reach for the stars. The proposals that followed would reshape galactic civilization, an integrated defense network, commanded jointly by human and alien officers, shared technology programs that would spread dimensional weapons to every world. Most importantly, a new philosophy of cooperation that replaced the old system of species looking down on each other. Captain Laura Mitchell, promoted to admiral after her heroic actions during the battle, was chosen to lead the new Galactic Defense Force. Her first order was to establish monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, watching for any signs that the Void Hunters might return. Dr. Helen Brooks was given unlimited resources to study null space physics, working with scientists from every species to understand the dimensional barriers that protected their reality. Her research would lead to technologies that seemed like magic, but were based on the same human ability to embrace contradiction that had saved them all. As the council session ended with unanimous approval of humanity's proposals, the delegates looked out at Earth from the observation decks of Unity Station. The blue world that had once been dismissed as a primitive backwater was now recognized as the heart of galactic civilization, but perhaps the most important changes were happening in hidden research, stations and memorial sites throughout the galaxy. Scientists of every species worked to understand not just the dimensional technologies that had saved them, but the uniquely human traits that had made victory possible. The ability to look into the face of impossible darkness and choose hope over despair. The willingness to stand together instead of fighting each other. The strange human talent for embracing contradictions and making them work. In the end, the galaxy learned that being primitive was not about having simple technology or young civilizations. Being primitive was about being unable to grow, unable to listen, unable to change when faced with new truths. Humanity had proven that they were anything but primitive. They had shown an entire galaxy what it really meant to be civilized. The Void Hunters were gone, their network broken, and their threat ended. But the unity they had forced upon the galaxy would last much longer. In research stations and defense posts on trading worlds and exploration ships, humans and aliens worked together as equals. The hunt was over. The hunted had become the guardians. And in the depths of space, where new mysteries waited to be discovered, the combined fleets of the galaxy stood ready to face whatever challenges the universe might send their way. Together,